Hey everyone, what's going on? West Productions 100 here, bringing you a live video. So for this video, I'm going to be talking about 9/11, September 11th, 2001. So I don't really get political on this channel. I try to tend to stay away from political stuff as much as possible at the moment. I'm just not really in the mood for doing it on this channel. But this is one of those cases where I feel like I want to just talk about something related to politics and social events with 9/11. I was inspired partly by a Canadian YouTuber from the Pacific Northwest area, British Columbia area, JJ. I'm not entirely sure how to say his last name. McCullen, I believe, is his last name, but I was partly inspired by him. He is a few years older than me. He was in high school when this all happened. I was still in grade school or grammar school or elementary school, however you want to put it. I was like in the second grade when this happened, essentially. But I still remember it, though. I still remember it. Just because I was in the second grade, that doesn't mean I don't remember what happened that day. I still remember. It's and then I was also influenced and inspired by watching news clips today. I've watched some documentary footage from it on the History Channel and elsewhere. So, and I really don't, to be honest, I don't really speak about what happened that often. But I thought, you know, but I wanted to add on to the experience of such a day because it's argued. I think it could be argued. September 11th was quite a change in the history of the United States and possibly the history of the world. And I can talk about more about that after I'm finishing up my story. So I was, like I said, I was around 8 years old when 9/11 happened. So I just remember waking up and just getting ready for school. And it was just like, it felt normal. At first, it felt like a typical, the typical morning rush with what we do with our lives, the typical morning rush. And so I got in the shower. I remember getting in the shower, just did it like every other day. And I remember getting out of the shower. And the first thing that really caught my attention is just how it's so vivid. It's so vivid in my mind. So I got out of the shower. I go, I go to look to my right. I get out the bathroom. I go to my right. And I look, to my right, and I see my parents there. And they're both just standing there in front of the TV in their bedroom, in their bedroom. And there was something about them doing that something felt wrong when I saw them both just standing there. They were both just so blank in the face. I could see it from a distance, but they were both just so blank in the face. And something just seemed wrong is what I'm trying to say. Something just really caught their attention. I shouldn't say something seemed wrong, but something just seemed up. So I go walking over to them. I don't remember. I feel like I was saying something to them, or maybe I didn't say something to them. But I just remember walking over towards them, and so I go and turn. I get into their room, and I turn my head towards the TV. And the first thing I see on the TV screen is the first tower of the World Trade Center. And it was just, I was in shock what I was looking at. Like, here's these towers, and one of them is just a big pile of smoke is coming out of the tower. The other one, that same tower has a giant hole in it, with the flames coming out of it. And I was 8 years old again, and I was just like in shock at what I was looking at. I'm like, what in the world am I looking at here? Like, this is just like, it's like, it's crazy. Just this, like, wow, my mind was blown. I was just in shock at what I was looking at. Hey man, I hope you're doing all right. Much love from your Canadian viewer. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. I appreciate you commenting, and thank you, man. I just kind of want to get these thoughts out there out of my head. I never really talk much about what happened on 9/11 for myself. I think I was inspired by other people, including a Canadian YouTuber, Ryan, JJ McCollum, I believe is his last name. I apologize to that man if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but he was part of my reason for he inspired me along with a bunch of other stuff to do this video. He talked about his own experiences when 9/11. He was in high school at the time 9/11 happened. He was in British Columbia. I'm in the Chicago area. So yeah, so even he talked about his own experience being from Canada. So I appreciate a fellow Canadian checking out my view right here. So just to yeah, I watched JJ. He has some really interesting views. Yeah, I totally agree with you. JJ is a really cool YouTuber. I like some of his views. I like his videos. And yeah, Albertan. Oh, awesome. I got a fan from Alberta, Canada. That's awesome. Thank you. You got some pretty cold winters up there, I'm sure. Just like us in the Chicago area. But yeah, no, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. And I thank you for your interest. So I just want to try and recap for you too, Ryan. See, I just went to my parents' room because they were both standing there in their bedroom. I got out of the shower and I'm just like something seemed off with them. They were so captivated by what was going on the TV. So I walk over to them just out of curiosity and I'm like, oh, what's on the TV? And I see those towers. And I see one of them, a giant pile of smoke coming out of them and flame. I'm just like oh my God, like what the heck just happened? And I think they mentioned they were just talking about how it was on fire. I don't remember if the newscaster said a plane hit the tower. They may have mentioned that, but it's been so long I can't fully remember. So I was standing there though. I'm just in shock. Where we were all just standing there in shock, like, whoa, holy crap! Like this is crazy. But something just it was crazy to look at what was happening, and I just felt it just felt like a lot to look at. And but that was just the beginning, though. Unfortunately, we were all standing there, and so the first tower's already hit, and clearly there wasn't TV cameras on when the first tower hit. Someone managed to get the clip. Someone managed to film it, but with their own personal camera. But I happened to see the second plane actually hit the tower. The second plane hit the tower live. It was live on TV. Like, I'm not even joking about that. There's I remember that so vividly. It just came out. I was like, oh my! It's just like I just remember freaking out. I was startled. I was like, whoa! Like, what the? Like, I was like, it was a terrifying moment to see that live on TV. I just remember the plane. It was a sideways, and it was at a curve. It was at an angle. It just flew angled into the building. And then there's a giant puff of flame just comes out of the building. And that was a total shocker right there. It was just a lot to look at. And, that's just a lot to look at right there. Excuse me. So we were terrified though. And when that second plane hit, I knew something was wrong. I knew something in my gut was or my mind was saying this is a really serious situation. This is possibly some kind of an attack of some sort. And then the news was saying it too. They were saying oh, this is probably some kind of this is intentional. And it just seemed intentional. I mean, no one, up until this point, no one ever really considered the possibility strong enough, I'm guessing. There were hijackings that happened before 9/11, but those planes, when they were hijacked, they were they would land in an airport, and all the passengers would be held hostage, and they would for ransom money and other reasons. Like no one ever up until this point had taken control of a commercial airliner and then used it as a giant kamikaze plane to just strike it into a building with all those people on board. So, it was crazy, and like I wasn't even sure if I was even going to school at this point, because I'm like, am I even going to school? Is school even open? And my school was open, so I was like, I guess I'm going to school then. I mean, like we didn't really know what. I mean, like my bio dad went to work, and he passed away many years afterwards. But I have a stepdad, but my bio dad was from New York City, actually. He was from Queens, New York, in the Queensboro. So when I think about that stuff sometimes with the World Trade Center, I feel really bad for him in that moment. Like I'm sure that must have been like heartbreaking for him to see that. I mean, I remember after the towers fell, and like he even told me a story where his dad, my grandpa, so a grandpa I never got to see either, but I remember him telling one time, like, you see those buildings go up there? Like, that's going to be like the World Trade Center. It's going to be the tallest buildings in the world. And that would have been back in like the 70s. So like, and I mean, there's other people, I've watched other videos today where there was other New Yorkers who were so used to seeing those towers up and just, like in their mind, when they close their eyes, they could still see those towers. So it's just like, it's crazy stuff. But like at the same time, I had to still go to school. School was still going on. So I went to school. And at the time, this may surprise people, but as an 8-year-old, I was knowledgeable about history compared to other 8-year-olds, I would say. Like I was a history buff, and I have been a history buff since I was like 5 years old. So I knew about the Gulf War at this point. I knew about people like Saddam Hussein. So I knew who at this point in my mind, when I was going to school, I was already convinced it was some kind of intentional attack of some kind. So in my mind, I'm like, who could have done this? Who could be responsible for this? And I thought the person that went to my mind at first was Saddam Hussein, because that was the only one. That was one of the few people I could think of at the time who may have thought about doing something like this, because I didn't know who Al Qaeda was. I mean, I didn't know what Al Qaeda was. I didn't know what the Taliban was. I didn't know who Osama bin Laden was, or al-Zawahiri. I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know what these groups or these factions were. I knew nothing about Afghanistan. So I didn't know about Iraq because of the Gulf War, and I happen to know of the Gulf War. I happen to have heard about it or seen images, or maybe even watched a documentary about it when I was 8 years old. I've been watching history documentaries since I was 5 or 4 at least. So at one point I was suspecting it must be maybe Saddam Hussein, but then I thought to myself, I don't know about that. Like, not sure if that's true or not. I've never heard of Saddam Hussein doing this before, and so I just went to school. Like I had to, we just went through, just power through the day. They didn't tell anything. They didn't even tell me anything at school. They really didn't even bring anything up at school either. I don't know why they didn't bother to bring it up at school. Maybe they just wanted to shelter us because we were in the 2nd grade, but I didn't know anything really. At school, we were all kind of kept in the dark, to be honest. It's kind of interesting, though, too, because other schools, including the one Ryan JJ school in British Columbia, they actually put them in the gymnasium and put them with a TV there, and they actually watched it as a student body, or they would have it on the TVs in like the different classrooms in their own school. So I'm sure that was the case in multiple schools in the United States at the time too, whether that was like high school or even grammar school. But my school though didn't do that. They didn't take us to the gym in the school and have a TV there or anything like that. They just proceeded with the day. I did hear I did hear precautions taking place in Chicago too, though. They did evacuate a lot of the buildings, including the Sears Tower, because think about the Sears Tower. That sounds like something that could be a target as well, in addition to the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, or in Chicago, the John Hancock Building. So all these tall skyscrapers. They've already gone after the World Trade Center. So who's to say they're not going to go after another skyscraper? So and no one at the time, no one at the time really knew what the heck was going on. So just obviously it makes sense to take precautions, and they grounding all the flights and stuff like that, just like a total panic. Our school, according to my friends, did the same thing as JJ's school. Okay. Ryan, feel free to speak. Feel free to mention if you were at home or not, or if you were still at your school. I was at home during the day. I can't remember why I was sick or something, but I clearly remember seeing it on our living room TV on Global News. Okay, yeah, Ryan. Thank you for letting me know about that. I appreciate all the different points of views, all the different opinions, eyewitness accounts of this day. Yeah, no, like I mentioned, like you mentioned, your friend, apparently your school did that, and so did JJ's school. And my school did not do that though. But I have heard of other schools doing that though. Like putting the TV in the gymnasium, putting the TV in the classrooms. I wouldn't be surprised if some other schools in the area did that. My grade school did not do that for one reason or the other. So I didn't even find out, at least from what I remember. I honestly can't remember anybody who worked for the school even mentioning this, but like I only found out. I only clearly remember finding out about the towers falling after I already got out of school. So this was already like in the late afternoon. This was already like 4:00 in the afternoon or like 5:00 in the afternoon. And I remember my mom picking me up from school, and she was the first person to tell me about the towers falling. And I was just like, oh my God, like, crazy, crazy stuff. I may have actually heard about one of the towers falling while in school, but again, it's kind of like all a blur right now with that. But for some reason, I remember vividly more so with my mom telling me that the towers fell after I got out of school. I don't really remember it ever being brought up in school, whether the towers fell at my school personally. But that was one of the first things I heard. She just brought that up to me. So she already knew that she knew I was aware of it because I watched the TV with her earlier that morning. And so, she would already know she already knew I'm comprehensive enough to know what's going on with the towers being hit. So that was the first time I ever really, found out about that, what happened afterwards. I just remember the rest of the night being I remember just being glued to the TV for the rest of that night, like just the constant news footage, the constant news coverage. Just the replay, just the news channels replaying the same stuff, just footage of the towers on fire and the smoke coming out of them, and the collapsing buildings and the people running and staring in awe and in terror, or I should say awe, but in shock. And yeah, just like a day that really just upended everything, I vaguely remember what getting on an airplane was like before 9/11. I was only 8 years old, but I remember having a few experiences before getting on an airplane. So there was like one time I can remember going through security where it was like easy, or it was like not as intense. And then shortly after 9/11 happened, that's when all that changed with airlines and airport security. It was just different after that. A lot more stricter with security, just a lot more rigorous, all these checkpoints, stuff like that. And then there was a shoe bomber that happened a few years ago. I mean, not a few years ago, a few years after 9/11, excuse me. So now you have to take off your shoes and you have to go through that. Especially if you got older, you had to take off your shoes. If you were a kid, you could still do it. You could still keep your shoes on, but I don't know at this point that's even the case. But that's what I just remember from 9/11. And then that's when I found out later about Osama bin Laden, Al Qaeda, and I was like, who are these people? Like I was like, what's Al Qaeda? What's Osama bin Laden? So piqued my curiosity about that person and those factions as well, because that was the first time I ever heard about it, and that's the first time Afghanistan really caught my attention as a place in the world was 9/11. All right, Ryan. Our school was a small prairie town of only roughly 500 people, student body and faculty total. In fact, when I went to vote early today during our election here in Canada, my third grade teacher recognized me and called me by name when registering to go and cast my ballot. That's how tight knit our community is in this area of Alberta. Oh wow, yeah, no small towns can do that. I'm sure. I'm sure. I believe you. I went to a small college, which is not the same, which is not 100% the same. But when you're in a small area with a small amount of people, it can, a lot of people can like know each other very well. Um, I went to smaller schools in the Chicago area, so that was also an experience like that. But like, being a small town, it's just a different community, a different vibe for sure. Or at least there's some differences. But I appreciate you sharing that, Ryan. Let's see here. I'd be curious to hear more about the election in Canada from you as well, Ryan. It slipped my mind that was happening. I heard some news about elections and politicians, like the conservative person, the person heading the Conservative Party in Canada, who JJ himself describes as like socially progressive, but like economically like a conservative. Yeah, that's how JJ describes that person. He's also my guide to Canadian politics. Yes, Aaron O'Toole. Thank you, thank you. And yep. So thank you very much, Ryan. And yeah, JJ is also my guide to Canadian politics. I know I could try and branch out a little bit more from just JJ, but one thing at a time. But hey, I'm at least it's a step. At least I'm somewhat in tune with what's going on, thanks to him. But yeah, just going back to 9/11 though. So that's when I became more curious about Afghanistan, Al Qaeda, the Taliban, Osama bin Laden. I was totally for. I was very much for going into Afghanistan, taking out Osama bin Laden and the Taliban. I lean more left of the political dial, but I do find JJ's opinions to be fairly unbiased. Okay, I would generally agree with you. I think JJ makes an effort to be as she tries to make an effort to be unbiased as much as possible, or a good amount of the time. So I do appreciate that from JJ. I did learn in journalism class that like journalism or news or opinion pieces can't be 100% unbiased, but I do believe that you can make an effort to be as unbiased as possible. So I do appreciate that from some people like JJ. Excuse me. But yeah, so a lot of what happened after 9/11 is a blur. I just remember watching a lot of the news coverage on the war on terror, and that was a big thing too back then in the early 2000s. The war on terror, the flashy journalism for that, and news coverage for that. Afghanistan, though, after a couple of years, it felt like it was kind of brushed off to the side a little bit, because then you start hearing more and more about Iraq, and I thought it was kind of interesting how they're making all these claims about the chemical weapons and about the different weapons in Iraq, and I remember the 9/11 attacks initially not seeming real to a lot of Canadians at first. Yeah, I would agree with that. It was a bit surreal to see that from my perspective as well. And with the Canadians being next door neighbors, like I'm sure there's a lot of interaction with what's going on with the United States and Canada. It did seem like quite out there when it happened. Like You would think, it's like for a lot of us, I'm sure we never really considered the possibility of people taking over airplanes and putting them into buildings. Like it was in the realm of possibility because it's happened. It happened before that a plane may be hijacked and then they take it to a runway and then they demand ransom money because that has happened. But no one thought or very few people maybe thought, I should say no one, but maybe very few people ever seriously considered that a plane could be taken over then used as a weapon, which is what happened, of course. When we were in Afghanistan for a couple of years, and then the attention turned towards Iraq. And I remember George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld talking a lot about these weapons of mass destruction that they claimed that Iraq had, and they made a lot of claims about how Iraq was connected to 9/11. They were connected to Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda. They were working together with them, which to me it seemed a little bit believable at first, but even I was kind of I was also kind of skeptical a little bit because I had learned enough about Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda to conclude that Saddam Hussein, in my mind, would not be okay with Al Qaeda. He would not be okay with Osama bin Laden because Saddam Hussein was a very power hungry person. He was a very authoritarian person, and I just don't. It was hard for me to believe fully that Saddam Hussein would be harboring Al Qaeda. Why would Saddam Hussein even benefit from something like that? In my opinion, he wouldn't have, because Saddam Hussein was was very much about, him and his power and those related to him. And if anything, Al Qaeda was just another influence that was going against him. And if I recall correctly, Saddam Hussein and his regime didn't even ideologically align with Al Qaeda. So it just seemed off that the Bush administration was making these claims when there was parts to it that were contradictory to what was being said there. Unfortunately, and when we did invade, I was kind of reluctant about it at first because I knew Saddam Hussein was a bad dude. He was a very bad guy. He was very authoritarian and very totalitarian. He was his own people were living in fear. A lot of them were. Some of them supported him, of course, but a good amount, the Kurds, lived in fear of this guy. Very few things could be done, and about him, and he was not hesitant to just start, unleashing devastating repercussions against you if you tried to go against him. He was not afraid to do that. So, he was not a good guy in my eyes to begin with. So that's why I was never really too much against the guy or too much against the war at first, because it's just to me it was this is something that should have been done back in 1991 with the Gulf War. Back then, we should have just taken care of that back then. So to me, our Operation Iraqi Freedom didn't really seem like a war against terror at first, or a war involving terrorism or Al Qaeda. It honestly felt like the Gulf War 2.0 to me. And so I bring all this up because it makes me question sometimes, especially what's happened recently with Afghanistan. It doesn't seem like it was worth it to go to Iraq in the first place. We didn't really get a whole lot out of it. Didn't really the so-called weapons of mass destruction that was claimed to be there didn't really turn out to be much of anything, and we ended up having a power vacuum. Despite the fact that Saddam Hussein was a total asshole, he was a bad dude. It's we didn't really do a whole lot ourselves, or the U.S. government and the coalition didn't really do a whole lot to nation building wise. There are examples where the United States and its allies have done a good thing with nation building, with Japan and with West Germany. And for some reason, though, we didn't do that as well with Iraq. Um, in fact, when we first like went into Baghdad, there was riots and there was looting and stuff like that. It was just kind of like we didn't really seem to understand, or it just didn't seem like it didn't really seem like we understood that we need to have like a thing in place before anarchy ensues and breaks and law and order breaks down, because you take out one order, which is Saddam's order, and then you bring yourselves in, but it's like all this chaos and anarchy. And then some of the other things that weren't taken seriously into account was the sectarian violence between the Sunnis and the Shiites, because again, not many of us in the United States know about Islamic politics or sub-politics or social disputes. And shoot, even I don't fully know a whole lot about that. But I mean, yeah, Sunnis and Shiites don't always necessarily get along, and there was a lot of turmoil there, and that resulted in sectarian violence. And we didn't really seem to do a good job initially, at least initially in the first years of the war, to like quell that disturbance or that peace. And it seemed to take a lot of attention, a lot of resources away from Afghanistan. Afghanistan seemed to become less and less covered in the news. Iraq became like the main focus, in my opinion, in my personal experience of watching the news in the early to mid 2000s and the late 2000s. Afghanistan kind of felt like a side piece. It kind of felt like it was pushed off to the side. And I remember watching the news, all throughout the 2000s with Iraq, and I'm kind of like, wait a minute, like, hold on, like, we went into Afghanistan because of 9/11. Like, why are we here in Iraq? Iraq was not where Al Qaeda was hosted. That's not where it was stationed. It was stationed in Afghanistan under the rule of the Taliban government, not under Saddam Hussein. It was the Taliban that hosted Al Qaeda in its own borders. It wasn't Saddam Hussein who did that. It was the Taliban who did that. So why were we in Iraq? It was kind of like, it was weird. It was like, and also just like, even though we were in Afghanistan, again, a lot of the media coverage was for Iraq in like the 2000s. Afghanistan felt very pushed to the side, and it's kind of like Afghanistan is the reason why we went into this all in the first place with 9/11. It feels weird that we're in Iraq for that reason. And then when you start doing these investigations and not a whole lot's turning up, all these claims about weapons of mass destruction don't seem to be so valid as you claim they were. It starts to put a hole in your own argument, And now here we are stuck in two countries. Whereas to try and do nation building now, because we didn't think this through long enough, and we didn't think this through hard enough. We were very much in a here and now moment, and we didn't think this through, as far as I can tell. That's as far as I can tell. Okay, Ryan, getting to your comments. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so basically, we couldn't believe that the great Americans, with their high budget Air Force and military in general, could not only let rogue airplane get that close to a major port city, but allowed two, not to discredit the bravery of all those men and women who helped during and after the attacks. Yeah, no, I mean, like, I think that's part of it. Like, I can totally understand that, because we just, nothing like this has happened before on the scale that it did, like with these commercial airliners. Like, there was times where people used planes to, dive bomb into ships, like during World War II with kamikazes, and other instances of people using planes as a weapon. They, dive into an object. But this was the first time it was ever used with a commercial airliner of this size, as far as I know. I mean, I can't think of another time ever since. It's been 20 years now since 9/11 happened. I can't remember a time before that, and I don't recall ever seeing anything that like suggests that a commercial airliner of that size was used as a weapon prior to 9/11. So I think that's part of the reason why I could totally was taken off, why people didn't suspect it could be taken off guard like that. And to not say the Canadian armed air forces are superior when it comes to predicting and disarming terrorist attacks, we've had our issues of armed gunmen cause mayhem, unfortunately, in our borders. Canadian soldiers were okay. So Canadian armed forces are not to say the Canadian armed forces are superior when it comes to predicting and disarming terrorist attacks. We've had our I see what you're saying there. I agree with you. No one's perfect, especially when it comes to something like terroristic attacks. I mean, like, they could be hard to predict, or they can be hard to like track. There could be cases where like a government agency is like looking out at the possibility of a couple individuals they're suspecting of a terrorist attack, and they may be on like a watch list, they may be suspected of it, but they may not be able to get them in case they do cause some kind of an attack of some kind. But yeah, you've had terroristic attacks. Absolutely. It's unfortunate. It's sad, and hopefully none more come to Canada. And I hope that's the case. And we'll see what happens in the future, though. That's the thing too about the future. I want to discuss the future as well. I'm just going to briefly mention it here again, though. Like the fact that it's been 20 years now, and like things feel a bit unstable still. Like it feels like I don't feel totally secure myself. I still feel like there could be another attack around the corner at this point. So I hope that's not the case. But like, given what's happened in Afghanistan recently, that didn't give me a lot of confidence. What happened in Afghanistan in the past few weeks did not give me a lot of confidence. Canadian soldiers were sent on peacekeeping missions in the Middle East with orders not to use lethal force unless our members were shot at first, which led to a lot of casualties, either by roadside bombs or surprise ambushes, where too many time due to UN restrictions, our men and women couldn't fire back to protect themselves unless the fight escalated to a certain point. Oh wow, that's crazy. That's crazy, Ryan. I didn't even know about that. Even if you couldn't fire back, like. So, like, are you saying there, like, because you say due to UN restrictions, they couldn't fire back to protect themselves unless the fight escalated to a certain point. So, like, if they start shooting at the Canadian soldiers, the Canadian soldiers can't just fire back initially? They have to wait until it just gets really bad, like, in order to even fire back? That's, wow. That's quite something right there. To be honest, Ryan, I didn't even know about that. I haven't even looked into the United Nations thing, restrictions or regulation when it comes to the United Nations. So it's actually it's interesting you bring that up. Thank you for bringing that up. That's definitely something I'd be interested to look more into, and to see if the same restrictions applied to U.S. soldiers or British soldiers, other allied forces, or if some were more, or if certain armies were more restricted than other armies. That would be that'd be interesting to see. But yeah, no, I mean, like roadside bombs, IEDs, guerrilla warfare tactics, both being used in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So again, this is the whole thing is. So I want to reflect on the 20 years, the time span, because we were on a peacekeeping mission. So to protect this village or crossroads, as an example, not go on hunt down an enemy like the U.S. was doing. Okay, yeah, no, I can totally, okay, that makes sense, Ryan. I may not even agree. I may not even agree with that myself, to be honest, but I can see the logic behind that. But there's definitely some flaws there that you brought up yourself with that logic. Like it's like, okay, here's one issue with that argument from, based on what I know, which is not a whole lot, but let's say they're protecting a village or a community and they're getting fired upon, and it's like, when do you respond back? Like, does the gunfire need to be so heavy that that the village itself is in danger, like everyone inside the village is in danger along with those Canadian soldiers? Like if you're being fired upon, like chances are they're not just the enemy soldiers are not just going to go away just because there's civilians there. Like, that's not necessarily going to stop them or deter them. Like, they'll still want to target the Canadian soldiers, and civilians may get in the crossfire because it might be the wrong place. They may just simply be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Like, so, I mean, it's crazy. Crazy situation to be in. I can barely even begin to understand like the emotional impact that could have, being in that kind of such a dangerous situation. So I have much respect to the Canadian troops, to U.S. troops, to British troops, to other kinds of troops, because like just like the stuff you would go through right there, just crazy. So yeah, we're in 20 years now, Ryan, and other people, just like 20 years at this point, and just like a lot's happened, and a lot of crazy stuff happened in the past few months, especially the past few weeks with Afghanistan. The United States seemed to have a better success story in Iraq, actually, instead of Afghanistan. I mean, look, it is what it is. But yeah, no, it does make me worried for the future. 20 years later, and I'm still thinking to myself like, what's around the corner? Who knows what's around the corner at this point? It's just kind of crazy to me, and like some of the fallout too. Like I didn't even mention like some of the other fallout, like with the xenophobia that came with this whole situation. Xenophobia, things just seem more on edge. And then you got more recent events like COVID-19 puts more people back on edge. Then you got Afghanistan puts more people back on edge. At least in the States, it does. It's just it's a lot going on. So it's crazy. 20 years later, and we're still it's a lot to reflect on, a lot to handle on. But with it being 20 years, I think it's also, and it being an anniversary for 9/11 in 20 years, being with it being 20 years, I think it's a good time to. I think it's a good time to just talk about it and to just bring it up and talk about the situation, And I appreciate Ryan here in the comments in the chat talking about his perspective too, because feel free to bring up your own perspective, your own situation. But yeah, with it being 20 years so far, it's definitely, it definitely like hits, in a certain way. Definitely a lot to take in and to think about. So, okay, Ryan, I'm gonna read your comments right now. The main problem with the war on terror is figuring out who your enemy was/is. Wasn't like most previous wars. The goat farmer you've been interacting with for the last few months could suddenly ambush your squad. That kind of was the main issue. Lots of guerrilla tactics. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, a lot of hit and run, IEDs, roadside bombs, and like you said, a lot of hit and run tactics. Guerrilla warfare. That's why a lot of people are comparing Afghanistan and Iraq to Vietnam as well. We were calling it the second Vietnam, and then when. And it doesn't help when a few weeks ago in Kabul you have Chinook helicopters landing on the top of buildings, just like it was in Vietnam, in Saigon. So it's like, yeah, okay, this seems even more and more familiar. The story seems even more and more familiar when you got helicopters landing on top of rooftops, evacuating people in a rush, in a daze, because like the enemy's coming into the capital. So, yeah. There are Canadian citizens still stuck at Kabul, which is a criticism towards Trudeau for calling an election during this Afghanistan crisis. See, thank you, Ryan, for bringing up that detail, because that's a detail that seems to be very much overlooked in the United States right now. Essentially, in the United States, we're very much focused on Americans and our Afghan allies. That's the main things I've been hearing on news stations like Fox News and other news stations. Very few of them mention our other international allies, and the fact that they still have citizens of their own nations in Afghanistan. I actually had to go out to other news sources like Al Jazeera and the German English-speaking one, DW, I think it is, the English-speaking German station. They have a YouTube channel. and other like more and other international other English speaking news stations from other countries who bring up their own perspective, because like Fox News is American. It's an American conservative news station, so like of course they tend to talk more about America and like Americans and things related to the United States. So I'm not saying the American stations never brought up like the British troops, the Canadian troops, but they definitely talked more about like Americans being stranded versus like citizens from other nations, including Canada. And my other thing I actually wanted to ask you about was with Justin Trudeau. So Justin Trudeau is calling for an election during this Afghanistan crisis. Can you explain to me then, Ryan, how that works? Why Justin Trudeau would be calling for an election? I'm not sure how that, because I don't know that part of Canadian politics. I don't know. It doesn't seem. It kind of reminds me of what's going on in California right now, where like there's a call for an election to recall the California governor Gavin Newsom. Is it kind of like that kind of situation, or is there something different about this one compared to what's going on in California? Because I heard there was some kind of political stuff going on in Canada with election, but I haven't had the time to find out more, and I really didn't know much about this to begin with the elections in Canada. So I would appreciate if you can update me on that. Sky News Australia is a big one. People are watching for non-American opinions. Yeah, no, definitely. Sky News Australia is like the conservative version of like that's definitely like a conservative leaning news channel from what I've seen on YouTube from their own clips that they have on YouTube. They definitely come off as more of a conservative Australian conservative news channel. But that being said, they are Australian, so they do offer opinions and viewpoints other than an American viewpoint or an American opinion. So that's definitely a cool channel to check. That would definitely be a cool channel to check out for different opinions and points of view. I have watched a bit of Sky News from Australia, and yeah, but they definitely do seem like a bit of a conservative leaning, Australian conservative leaning. Feel free to say I'm wrong if I'm wrong, but they definitely come off as conservative to me, at least by the standards of American conservatism. They kind of seem to go in that direction. So it's a federal election that's going to basically either take the Liberal Party out of Parliament, remove Trudeau as Prime Minister. Okay, so it's kind of like, interesting. Okay, so it's kind of it's already a federal election. So it was probably, my guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but my guess is that election was already scheduled from the start, kind of like how in the United States there's a presidential election that happens in November once every 4 years. This was already scheduled to happen regardless of what was happening in Afghanistan or not. Maybe I'm wrong, but feel free to correct me. I need to brush up on my knowledge of Canadian politics. So he wants to regain base. He wants to regain trust from his home base for his party. He gained more seats in the House of Commons. Interesting. I would have thought that a time like this, a crisis like this, that would make. I would think that the main party in charge and the main prime minister of that country would be hesitant about having an election, but he seems more confident about having an election, despite what's happened in Afghanistan. He doesn't. I'm guessing he doesn't seem deterred by that. But again, I'll have to look into Canadian politics sometime more often than I do now, because it just seems like a weird thing to me that he would just try and force an election through, or not force, but like he would insist on calling for an election Um, like it feels like an improv election, or like maybe not improv, but like we're just gonna have an election that's not an annual election. So okay, the election was not scheduled, which is why. So the election was not scheduled, which is why everyone is shaming the liberals for calling it now, even though they still had 2 years before the planned election, but due to low approval ratings, etc., they are trying to revamp their image and acquire a majority government. Okay, so they definitely okay. So interesting. Yeah. I'm not used to I'm not used to that here. The only thing I really heard about that happening, yeah, that's just a very foreign thing to me right now, because I don't really hear about that happening very often. Um, but there's annual elections. That's what I would assume would be the case. But this is not a scheduled election. They are trying to make this happen. They are trying to just make a election happen out of the blue, essentially, or out of thin air. Just come out, or improv an election, improvisation election. Um, yeah, because Ryan, I don't know if you know what's going on in California right now, but there are some people who want to recall Gavin Newsom, the current governor of California, and that's not even like an official election, or that's not. I shouldn't say official, but it is an official election. It's not a traditionally scheduled election. It's not an annual election scheduled. Like you're like it kind of reminds me of what's happening here in Canada, like because some people in California want to get rid of Gavin Newsom. They feel like he's caused too much damage to California, with the COVID lockdown 19 restrictions. He feels like some people in California argue that Gavin Newsom's restrictions are too hard and he's done too much damage to the California economy. So there's this. That's what the recall is about right now. Um, we'll see what happens with that. The recall happened. The recall election happens in a few days, I believe. I believe September 14th, if I recall correctly, is when that happens. Yep, Tuesday, September 14th is when the recall election happens. That's what reminds me of that. Oh, so the liberals have a minority government right now. Interesting. So that made Trudeau getting anything done in his previous term almost impossible, like pulling teeth. Okay, interesting. I know they have that Black Party leader who is right leaning, and the Cali media is calling him a white supremacist. Apparently, if you're right leaning in that state, you're all or nothing. Yep. Yeah, but I do know. Okay, I know they have that Black Party leader who is right leaning. The Cali media is calling him a white supremacist. Yeah, that's Yep, you are correct. California media and some of the national left-leaning media in this country is calling him a white supremacist. They one headline went as far as saying he's the black face of white supremacy. Um, his name is Larry Elder. Um, he comes. He's a guest host, or not? I guess I'm sorry, not a guest host, but he's a guest participant. He's like a participant. I can't think of the word right now, but he's a featured guest, I guess you could say, on Fox News, on Sean Hannity tonight, who's a late night talk show host on Fox News channel. That's where he ends up being up on a lot is Sean Hannity's show, compared to some of the other Fox News hosts. He's on that one a lot, and yeah, no, like he even had eggs thrown at him recently. So yeah, no, there's definitely a good amount of people in California who don't like him, but in terms of opposition towards Gavin Newsom, though, he's the one who's had the highest. He's the one with the highest turnout, highest voter turnout in terms of opposition. I was looking at a piece yesterday for in terms of approval ratings, and in terms of people who could replace Gavin Newsom, and Larry Elder, the black man you're referring to, was the highest percentage-wise in the poll that I saw, in terms of people who would vote to replace Gavin Newsom. That was Larry Elder was the highest person who was doing that. Yes. Wonder what Anderson Cooper thinks of this Larry guy. Then, yeah, good question. I don't know. I don't know. But if I had to guess, he's probably not fond of the guy. Larry Elder is conservative leaning. He's definitely conservative leaning. So I would say that I don't see Anderson Cooper being very fond of Larry Elder. But yeah, because he's conservative, and I don't think Anderson Cooper is a very conservative person. Last time I checked, maybe he is, but so yeah. But no, I appreciate that, Ryan. I appreciate the update there with Canadian politics because I don't know. That one didn't really. That one kind of slipped through the cracks for me. Maybe I'll check out JJ's YouTube channel. Maybe he's talked about it, but I haven't really seen much for that. But I just think it's interesting that Justin Trudeau is trying to make this bet happen with the trying to bet on more people voting for the Liberal Party in Canada by hosting this I'll call it an impromptu election. I don't know if that's a correct term, but it just kind of feels like an impromptu election. Vice is a great documentary on YouTube during the Black administration about Black conservatives. Yeah, I checked out that documentary. I think I did anyway. I watched thing from Vice on Black conservatives, so that sounds like something I've seen before, and from Vice. And I love Vice. I love Vice video content, their documentary content. Their written pieces, on the other hand, I'm not as big of a fan of their written pieces. I'm much more of a fan of their documentaries, and I have been a fan of their documentaries for like over 10 years now. I definitely dig Vice. I would totally be down to get a job with Vice if I could, in their documentary department or the video department. I've been a fan of their style, and some of the coverage they do is just like is stark. It's breathtaking. Some of the danger those journalists put themselves into. It's just like I'm just like wow, crazy stuff. You can watch the English 2021 Canadian leaders debate on YouTube to get a better understanding of our situation. Okay, maybe I'll do that then. Yeah, I can put it on the TV over here. I got a YouTube app on the TV. Maybe put that up on the TV. I appreciate that, Ryan. So going back to 9/11 now, I know that I know we taught it's going back to 9/11. Ryan, feel free to also mention more about 9/11 since your comments will be in the chat as well. Yeah, it's just it's just again with it being an anniversary of an event like this, it's just like it's definitely felt like a time for me to just talk about it openly like this in a stream and just get my thoughts out there, get my feelings out there, and just open up about what it was like to me to see this. And I appreciate other people's comments in the chat talking about what their experiences were like too, because I've heard a variety of viewpoints, of reactions. Like all sorts of people reacted differently. They all had different experiences. They were all in different moods, So it's interesting to hear other people's points of view, their experiences with 9/11, because like it's still not such a 9/11 happened 20 years ago, so a good amount of people still remember it. A good amount of people still can remember like the day where they were the day it happened. It's one of those events for a lot of people where they can remember the day or the week of it. So kind of like with COVID-19, I remember when the lockdowns happened. I can remember where I was when the lockdowns happened. And it was very distinct for me because of certain things. So like 9/11 is the same. And that being said, the future right now, even though they got Osama bin Laden and they did do we did do some crippling damage to Al Qaeda and the Taliban. I mean, they still made a comeback. It's also frustrating to see what happened there too, because you had all these nations come together, including Canada, and you put all this money, all this time, all this investment, and the Afghani government just falls apart within a matter of months. Their military, which we gave them all this equipment and military funding and training. Their military just falls apart. It's like that's also frustrating too. That's a part of American media, news media, that I feel like they're not talking about enough. Is what happened. The fact that the Afghani government was like, for whatever reason, just fell apart. That the military just fell apart. Like all that time and training and investment we did, and like with the evacuation, like how fast everything happened, and just how like it's like how could we be so? How could the United States and the allies of the United States and the Afghani government, how could they not have? How were they so blind to how well the Taliban was doing that they could advance and be as successful as they were? Where it got to the point where that current president at the time, he literally just left the country on a plane because it just like, and then a few days later the Kabul falls. It's just like, it's just like wow, and it's like you gotta feel bad for some of these people over there still. Some of them don't want to live under the rule of the Taliban. You could tell by seeing what happened at the airport, just how the chaos of it all, just the craziness. And it's like something out of a Hollywood movie, like World War Z. It looked like something. It reminded me of World War Z because of the airport scene in Israel in the World War Z movie. It's like 20 years and all this stuff we've done, and it's hard to like it's hard to accept what has happened there, especially how fast it happened. I think that's the other thing too. It'd been one thing like if it was a couple years, like not the Soviets, I should get to that too, but the Afghani government that we helped to fund and to prop up, and the military that we helped to fund and train. It'd be one thing if like it would still have been a bummer and very disappointing if they somehow failed and they faltered, but it still would have been better than what happened here. I mean, the Soviet bad government in Afghanistan lasted longer by a few years, for crying out loud. Like ours didn't even last for a year or 6 months on its own. But all right. 9/11 is unique because it happened in an age where, thanks to technology, it was able to be recorded semi as it happened, which in terms of hindsight and investigations is huge. From my understanding, Trump made a deal at a certain date. He would remove troops. Keep in mind, Canadian Armed Forces, not willing civilian translators, care aides, etc., have been out of Afghanistan since 2014. Yes, and that's the other thing I wanted to thank you for reminding me. It slipped my mind. I was going to say it, but the Afghan civilians that were there, especially the ones that helped us too, like the translators, the ones that we cooperated with, they all have a target on their back now. And we also just screwed up the U.S. military and the government screwed up there too, because apparently the Taliban somehow got the DNA or the facial recognition of the people, like and even their eyes, like the recognition of the from our databases of our own allies. It's like crazy. It's like how did the Taliban get all that information? Like they have all this information that they can now use to hunt and track down people that helped us. How did we let that information, or how did they let the information fall into the wrong hands? Like, it just shows you how bad our intelligence was, that how successful the Taliban was doing that, and it's just it's just like crazy, and it brings me back to the civilians, the Afghani civilians, like you said, Ryan, and like the translators. And some of these people are also stuck in the country too, along with the Canadian civilians and American civilians, other civilians internationally, and but yeah, no, I mean, like a lot of the military is out of there at this point, except I've heard contractors, like independent contractors, would still be there, but yeah, it's just like Um, yeah, it's just it's just a lot to take in. Let's put it that way. Trump set a date to remove troops. Then, once Biden got into office, for some reason, he extended the deal to a further date late in summer, which gave the Taliban more time to organize. Yeah, they did. I'm not entirely sure why that was extended. The deal was extended. Um, Plus, they clearly saw an opportunity with a weak leader in Biden to take charge over the area. Yes. Unfortunately, there's some truth to that. At least, I watched a video from RT Russia Today, English speaking Russian POV news channel, and they interviewed someone from the Taliban, like a media spokesperson, and even that the Taliban media, even that Taliban spokesperson, excuse me, said maybe Biden's confused because, and they went into some detail about something I don't remember, but like that part definitely stuck out to me. Where even the Taliban's like, President Biden seems to be confused, like about what the deal is here. Like it's like okay, so even I'm not entirely surprised, but it's just interesting to hear them say that too, where they're like, yeah, Biden seems confused, or Biden doesn't seem to understand, or something, or they, you know. Um, but yeah, it makes me wonder though, like what the deal is, like so like Biden extended the deal to get a further date late in the summer. Um, I don't know why all that happened, and they gave the Taliban more time to organize. Maybe there's just a breakdown in communication that where the Afghan army just didn't get the message, the Afghan government didn't just get the message, or maybe there's a breakdown from the American point of view or the Allied point of view. Yeah, the story of what's happened in Afghanistan this year is definitely something that's going to be studied a lot because a lot of people want to know what went wrong. It seems to be very fascinating to find out what went wrong here. It just is. Especially just given everything been there for 20 years and just to see what happened so quickly. I should say 20 years because that's technically not accurate, but it's very close to 20 years. Yeah, I agree with that too, Ryan. Because like, why would they willingly leave all the equipment behind when extended date doesn't make sense, nor does it make sense for Biden to remove armed forces before evacuation of civilians and refugees. I agree with that too. Because it is weird. It's hard to really grasp our minds around that. Like we don't know all the details, we don't know all the reasons as to why. But but like it's also just hard to understand why someone would do that because you make a good point because it wasn't just the Afghani military equipment that was confiscated by the Taliban. It was also equipment that the American soldiers and other allied soldiers had at their own bases that was confiscated by the Taliban. Like how the United States just abandoned that Air Force base. It's like why they abandoned an Air Force base? Why? Why would you just abandon the Air Force base and not even like bother to like demolish it or turn it over to the Afghan government? You just completely abandon an Air Force base. And not only that, but you leave a bunch of equipment behind. This is a great topic for a documentary or a video essay. But like, they essentially left all this stuff behind. The U.S. military did at this Air Force base. And I forgot the name of the Air Force base, but it was like in northeast Afghanistan. And it's just a very weird thing because, it was not just the military equipment from the Afghani army that we gave to the Afghani army that was confiscated by the Taliban. It was all this other stuff that was left behind, like you said. So it would have been one thing if all the equipment was confiscated by it would have been one thing. Excuse me, if all the equipment was confiscated by the Afghan army from the Taliban, but they also confiscated things at abandoned military bases from the Americans too. Um, and then when we were evacuating out of the country at the airport, I've seen footage where like I got confused because I thought they were Afghani soldiers, but it was actually like Taliban soldiers in like full on like U.S. military gear. They looked like special forces soldiers, but they were Taliban in those outfits, I believe. But they walked into that airfield, they walked into the hangar bay, and there's those Chinook helicopters right there, and they also just all their gear that's left there. Like why wasn't that gear just dismantled? I mean, like, yeah, it's just weird. I remember seeing one news headline too where they're like, "Oh, the Taliban doesn't know how to use this stuff." It's like, and what makes you think that they can't learn how to use that stuff? Sure, the Taliban may not know how to operate a Black Hawk helicopter, but what's to say that they're not going to learn how to do that? Like, it's like, come on now, like, oh yeah, maybe they don't know how to do it right now, but like that doesn't mean they can't learn how to use a Black Hawk helicopter. Um, um, and like you said, also they tried removing armed forces before evacuation of civilians and refugees, and I think that's a really good point to bring up too. And that's also part of the frustration to me because I'm sure you know this too, Ryan. There were Afghan allies, Afghani translators who helped out U.S. soldiers, who helped out Canadian soldiers, and there were some who were trying to get out of Afghanistan for years prior to what happened a few weeks ago. They put their names on a list, they applied for visas, they tried to get them and their families out of there. So it wasn't like all in one week, like all of our Afghani allies were just trying to get out and rush these planes and stuff like that. There were people in Afghanistan who were trying to get out of Afghanistan for years because they were very afraid for their lives, or they were trying to get some of their family members out of Afghanistan because they were afraid for their lives because they were helping us. They were helping the United States and Canada and other allied armies by being translators, by helping us in other positions. So it's like all those people that they were, they've been helping us for years, and we were slow to like even do much of anything to give them any kind of status in the United States or elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, everything just comes falling apart at once, and all of a sudden now they just rush all these people on the planes and just trying to get them all out of there. It's just like, what a total mess. Just crazy. And it just adds to the frustration when you look back on 20 years and you look at what we've done and what has been a failure and what has been a success, and just some of the ways we went about doing things, how some of the ways things were executed, and what you say right there about how they evacuated armed force before evacuating civilians and refugees, especially especially civilians that helped us, and civilians that wanted to actually come to the United States or come to Canada or other countries because they were translators and they had a legitimate reason because they were afraid for their lives, and they had a target on their back for years, and they were hoping, living in fear, just trying to watch their back, and also now they're rushing, trying to leave and get out, and just crazy stuff. So I've heard some crazy stories, like an Afghani high school women's robotic team trying to get out of there, and the plane they were going to leave on had to be turned around and head back to where it came from. It couldn't even land in Kabul. I heard of a Afghani soccer player who was so frantic and frightened. He was so desperate to get out. He clinged to one of the airplanes. And apparently he passed away because he's trying to get on the airplane. It's nuts, and it makes me worried. It does. It makes me worried what's going to happen. Even if the Taliban doesn't have any interest in harboring people that want to attack us, there's still other groups out there that may be willing to try. I mean, I recently just found out what ISIS-K is. I watched a video from his History with Hilbert, and he gave a 5-minute synopsis on ISIS-K and how they don't get along with the Taliban and how the Taliban might have to fight them, and But again, with the Taliban, given their track record, I'm not totally going to just trust them either. And just look at what's happened the past few weeks. Yeah, they broke their own promises. They said they were going to be more tolerant of other beliefs. They said they weren't going to go after, after Afghani allies. They said, if you help the Americans, or you help the Canadians or the British or whoever, if you were a translator, we will forgive you. You don't have to worry about anything. Bullshit. They fucking went after some of these people. Like, they totally. I mean, and to be fair, I never fully 100% trusted them, because look at how they ruled Afghanistan for 5 years before 9/11 happened. I mean, like, as a very totalitarian, authoritarian state. So, like, I don't see why the Taliban would just be this completely reformed group. Like, even if they have little changes here and there, I don't see them fully being different now, like, in a matter of 20 years, especially when they were just fighting us, like, on and off the whole time. Like, it was nice to think that they were actually going to legitimately forgive, like, people, and, like, oh yeah, we won't kill you. We'll wipe the slate clean. If you helped the Americans beforehand, don't worry about it. It's fine. Just don't do it again, or whatever. But even I didn't fully trust them. I'm just like, no, you know what? I can't trust this guy. I can't fully trust these guys. I don't blame people fully trusting them either. So I don't know. It's just the whole thing's crazy. But I mean, at the same time, people in that country have been living through war and guerrilla warfare for like 20 plus years. I'm sorry, not 20 plus years, but like nearly 20 years. And that's not including if anyone in that country lived through the Soviet Union times and the Civil War that happened after the Soviet Union. Then you got the United States and its allies coming in the early 2000s. I remember a news reporter basically summing it up. The Americans just gave the enemy a major upgrade. Yep. That's a good way of putting it. I know memes are going around of a Taliban soldier saying how they can't operate the equipment. Yeah, no, they are. They're definitely out there. And it's not even just memes too, it's not even just memes. It's also I've also seen a news headline from a news publication that put that out there. Like, oh, they don't know how to operate this equipment. Well, it's like, and why exactly are you just gonna why are you gonna just throw out that they won't figure out how to operate the equipment? Like, what makes you think they're not gonna figure that out? Like, they can. It's within the realm of possibility. They took over the country. Like, they could totally. It's totally within the realm of possibility that they can learn how to operate this machinery. But the Russians left behind their weapons in the 80s, gave them enough time to learn and practice, and they will be using everything from the vehicle to night vision and you say tactical personnel gear. Yep, I totally believe that. I mean, I saw that video of that hangar bay when I think the Americans left by that point, and they just walk in and here's these Chinook helicopters in the hangar bay. It's like that may have been Taliban fighters, like, all dressed up in like camouflage and having bulletproof vests and night vision goggles and, like, other headgear and stuff like that. Yeah, because I'm not used to seeing Taliban soldiers like that. I'm used to seeing them in more civilian clothing. Yeah, like militia clothing. It's like someone working hard and saving every single penny they can, getting a good credit score over 20 years, buying a brand new Ferrari with a finance loan, but they did it. They got the goal. Just to immediately total the car on the highway a day after driving off the lot. Oh gosh, sadly that's a good analogy right there. I think, yeah, 20 years building things up, and just like taking that Ferrari that you try to save up 20 years for, and then just totally demolishing it on a highway. Taliban versus ISIS-K is a situation of who do you back, the lesser of two evils. Yeah, you're right. You got a good point. Also, if you watch, I didn't think about this, but if you watch the History with Hilbert video, he makes a good point that ISIS-K is like a subgroup of ISIS, and like, why did ISIS start? Why is ISIS a thing? Because of what happened in Iraq. That what happened in Iraq contributed to the instability that we saw elsewhere, and with Syria as well. And this all ties back to 9/11, funny enough, because we invaded Iraq and that caused instability, and then instability, didn't have the most stable government that we helped to create. And ISIS actually almost took over Iraq. I think it's like we kind of forget about that for a while. Like ISIS was so strong at one point. Like it's been like 5 to 6 years since ISIS itself was really at its height of power, especially in Iraq and Syria. But at one point, we totally forget about this. But at one point, they had advanced pretty far into Iraq, and they were at the doorstep of Baghdad at one point. And a similar thing happened too, where the Iraqi military also abandoned some of their own military equipment that we gave them. Um, but in their case, they were able to push back against the ISIS with our help and other people's help. But yeah, no, I mean, like, at one point, ISIS was so strong, and they were confiscating their equipment that we gave them, and like they were at one point at the door of Baghdad. Like, it's nuts. Like, it's crazy. It's kind of crazy that we kind of forgot about ISIS in a way. Like back in 2015, they were the big boogeyman, the big problem, and like now they kind of just feel like relegated to the side. It's like, how do we know these people can't come back? How do we know that ISIS won't make a comeback? They're in now we have ISIS-K in Afghanistan. How do we know that they won't start a civil war with the Taliban and try and take over power from the Taliban? And I think it's also a good point you bring up there, where it's like the lesser of two evils. It's like because we don't like either one of these guys. We don't like either one of these factions. We don't like the Taliban or ISIS-K. But it's like, if you're going to compare them, Taliban may be slightly more tolerable to ISIS-K because there's a chance, in my opinion at least, that the Taliban won't try and screw with us again, because when they screwed with us by harboring and having hosts to Al Qaeda, and then we came in there and took them out and took out Al Qaeda, and they lost control of the country for 20 years, and they just got back control of the country again recently. So after having struggled for 20 years to regain control of that country that they lost, I doubt they want to, rattle the nest, rattle the snake cage that is the United States, and start another fight with us. So I don't think they're going to play around for a while, at least. Who knows? Maybe in 10 years, Taliban will become cocky again. They'll become arrogant, and they'll be like, "Yeah, we'll host and harbor a terrorist organization like Al Qaeda or similar to Al Qaeda," and then they'll go out and cause more terror attacks and stuff like that. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Yep. I believe you there, because we've had the same thing happen in the United States. I've heard of ISIS recruits being recruited in Europe and going over to Syria or to Iraq. And ISIS for a while also had a powerful propaganda machine. They had a powerful social media influence too. That's another thing we forget about. It's easy to sometimes forget the power of social media, because we get caught up in certain posts on social media, including YouTube. But some of these people, they're really good with social media. I don't fully know how they do it, but like they're able to just embolden people on social media and just on the internet in general. And some of these organizations do a really effective job at it. It's actually kind of fascinating to me, honestly, because it's fascinating to me because it makes me like want to learn how they're doing that. Like, what is it about their content that gets people motivated to join them? What is about their kind of content? What is it that, doing it? And like, I mean, even the Taliban was using social media as a propaganda tool to like, say, oh, hey, look how we're doing in Afghanistan. Look at all the progress we've been making and taking back Afghanistan. The Taliban was posting their own social media. Yeah. You're comparing dubstep to ISIS, nice, with the social media presence. I mean, I'm not saying you're comparing them directly, like they're like ideologically speaking. I meant with their online presence or social media presence. So it's been turned way down, though, with sphere of influence. If you wanted to find it, I'm sure you can, even if they are probably pushed back towards the dark web. Yeah, because I think a lot of their social media has been taken down by those companies that they were hosting their own channels on. But yeah, you probably could find it. I mean, like the Taliban. I'm sure the Taliban had something on the dark web too. The websites are out there probably. I wouldn't know where to necessarily look myself, but yeah, you could probably find them somewhere. Yeah, it's just Ryan and everyone else. It's just crazy. Like with 9/11, just it's been 20 years. Sometimes it's hard. It's hard to. It's just one of those moments in our lives, in our own lifetimes. It's one of those life changing moments. I'm sure people throughout history and the centuries, they've experienced their own life changing moments, their own moments where like this was the moment where things changed forever in my life. They never were the same again. Like, and this is not, and 9/11 is like that for a lot of people. You know, things have, for a lot of people, I'm sure things have never fully been the same since 9/11. I mean, like I know my life hasn't been fully the same since 9/11. Um, but like, I was still somewhat young when it all happened. So I'm sure for people who are a bit older than me and Ryan as well, that they're more fondly remembering a time where there wasn't so much security at the airport. Maybe things weren't as hostile towards other people, because there definitely has been a lot more fear and xenophobia since 9/11 for sure. A lot more fear of the other person, and fear of the unknown. A lot of ignorance out there too, on all sides. Uh, just a lot of going on, and it's still there in my opinion. 9/11, Obama becoming president, Trump running and winning the presidency, coronavirus lockdowns. We're still not as pandemic. True. The Capitol riots, the election fraud scandal. Oh yeah, a lot of stuff going on. You got it right there, Ryan. Yes, very true. I was gonna say, like, when you mentioned lockdowns, like I was gonna say, like, is he gonna mention like the riots and the riots that happened in the summer of 2020 with the George Floyd, or the peaceful protests as well, or just mention George Floyd at all? Um, yeah, no, but like I've seen stuff going on in Canada too with the lockdowns. Some stuff. Notice I'm just listing American events. Yep, not Canadian ones. I've heard of some stuff happening in Canada too, though. But Canada really does nervously watch America way more than we even focus on our country's issues. That's interesting, Ryan, and I appreciate that perspective because yes, and yes, Black Lives Matter movement, not to lower the impact of that. No, yeah, for sure. I I didn't assume that. I didn't assume that you didn't lower the impact of it by not bringing it up. You already brought up like a good amount of topics already. And also, I think something to bring up too is like a lot of these events are also interconnected in one way or another. 9/11 happened, and then we have Bush Bush saying we're going to go to Afghanistan, then we go to Iraq. We had a or the wars became very unpopular, especially Iraq, and that resulted in Obama becoming, like, well, that contributed to Obama becoming president. There were other reasons too, like the Great Recession, which happened before Obama became president. So yeah, but like the war in Iraq contributed to the decreasing popularity of Bush, and people were like tired of 8 years of the Republican Party. They wanted something different, so they thought Obama would be better. So people voted for Obama. Obama gets 2 terms, and then things become a bit more mixed about like where the country wants to go, the United States. So some people think we need a more conservative person, a more conservative, strong-head figure. Someone like Trump comes in. He was a Democrat at one point. He switched Republican, and he comes off loud and boastful and aggressive, and that appeals to a portion of the American population. That boastfulness, the directness, the aggressiveness of Trump, that appeals to many people in America. So you get that, and then you get coronavirus, the lockdowns, everything else that comes along with that, like you said, and like I said, George Floyd and the protests and the riots that happened with that. Then the Capitol riots, the Capitol Hill riots, the election fraud scandal. Like, yeah, it's just like a lot of this stuff all coming together, and they all kind of like play off one another. And one can make the argument that 9/11 definitely helped to solidify some of this stuff. I think helped contributes to changing the mindset of people, and it makes me wonder, like where we go from here. Essentially, it makes me wonder. To be honest, I don't know. I think it's hard to say where we go from here. I think I feel like I'm not in a position to fully make a judgment on that. Where we go. We had, I think, over a decade of conservative leader Stephen Harper. Then we swung over to a young, charismatic liberal leader in Trudeau. Yeah, you did have. You did have Stephen Harper for a while. I vaguely remember that, but I know you've had Justin Trudeau for a while too. It's been, how many years has it been already? It's got to be at least 4 to 5 years, I think, with Justin Trudeau, if I recall correctly, because I was undergrad when the Justin Trudeau was still being around, so that was like 2017, 2018. So yeah, but we'll see what happens with him in this election, because him and his party are attempting, like you said, to gain more liberal votes and more liberal seats in the Parliament of Canada. So we'll see how that happens. And like, I know it may not seem like a lot, but like I feel like what happens in Canada also impacts the United States and vice versa. I guess based on what you told me though, with how Canadians have a tendency to look at a lot of what's going on in the United States, and I think the YouTube channel JJ is an example of that as well. Yeah, I mean, like what goes on here also can have an impact in Canada as well, is what I'm trying to say. Because Canada and the United States have such a close bond, in a way, as far as I can tell. 9/11 holds a weird place in the zeitgeist. On one hand, it's used as a remember 9/11, never forget, to rally up American patriotism. And on the other hand, you have comedians like Matt Stone and Trey Parker doing 9/11 jokes through Eric Cartman episodes, like blaming Kyle for causing the attacks. Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up too, Ryan. Definitely some jokes about 9/11 here and there. And maybe as time goes on, there'll be more jokes with 9/11 as well, or more comedic themes going on. Because for some people, 9/11 is still a very taboo subject. Like, you don't like, for some people it's like, that's not funny, you don't joke around about that. But some people like to push buttons. And I know Trey Parker, and Matt Stone do that. I've seen other examples. Like, I've seen like other memes and videos online where there's been like, joke videos about 9/11 too. Or like a podcast I listen to called Goose Buds, who have a running joke about time travel 9/11 to hide bodies at Ground Zero. Oh wow. Yeah, I mean, if time travel was a thing, you could do that. You could hide the bodies and they would probably just disintegrate. Yeah. Damn. Yet in contrast, they aren't making jokes on, say, Pearl Harbor, just for example. Yeah, okay. See, that's a good example too. It's like we in the United States. I'm not sure about Canada, but in the United States, Pearl Harbor still has some relevance, but like people don't necessarily make jokes about Pearl Harbor as they would like with 9/11. It's just like people don't even make jokes that much about Pearl Harbor at this point, honestly. Like maybe once in a while, but like memes or jokes is Pearl Harbor's not really thought of as a thing to be memed for some reason. At least in my experience, it has been from what I've seen. Like 9/11 is the event that where the memes come into place. Maybe it's just because of timing and context. A lot of people with the internet age, maybe it's more relevant for people because we live. A lot of us lived during that time or vaguely remember it, like how I vaguely remember it, or how you vaguely remember it, Ryan, or other people vaguely remember it. And also, I'm not, not everyone that's my age or your age is a history buff either. So Pearl Harbor may not be as significant to a lot of people in this age or this day as 9/11 is, and that's totally understandable. At the same time, though, one can make the argument that what happened with Pearl Harbor if you connect all the dots, like, because history, in my opinion, is an ever going, and it's an ever going, it's an ongoing story, and one can make the argument that Pearl Harbor led, to the United States being involved in World War II, which led to the United States being a superpower with the rivalry with the Cold War, and for decades was in this rivalry with the Cold War, the proxy wars, and then aiding financially and monetarily and with goods, other resources, other people. And the Soviet Union went to Afghanistan in the 80s, and the United States government gave the Mujahideen money, and they gave them military arms, and like they gave certain they may not have meant for more radical parts of the Mujahideen to get that arms and that money, but like at a certain point it's out of their control, and just like I'm sure some of that stuff would have ended up in their arms anyway. So it's like, I mean, like the United States military gave the fighters, like they gave them Stinger missiles, to shoot at Soviet helicopters and airplanes. So like, and other kinds of weaponry. So Afghanistan in the 80s was the Soviet Union's Vietnam, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, like then the government in the Afghanistan, they fall. There's a civil war and strife, and then the Taliban takes over, and then they harbor Al Qaeda, and Al Qaeda attacks, the Twin Towers, the Pentagon. Now I know it sounds a bit. I mean, I'm kind of simplifying things. I know there's a lot more detail than that, but like a general gist of things is what I'm trying to say is like certain events lead to other events. That's essentially what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying these jokes offend me personally. No, yeah, for sure, Ryan. I understand. Not everyone gets offended by these jokes. Just I'm sure some people get offended by them. I just find that divide interesting, and I agree. Yeah, it's just like Ryan. To me, it's also just like how people have viewed 9/11 or how they received it, how they were receptive to it. Because like everyone reacted differently to 9/11. Like certain people reacted one way, certain people reacted a different way. Not everyone, in my opinion, reacted the same way to 9/11. Before Pearl Harbor attacks, leading U.S. to declaring war on the Axis powers, the U.S. was hardly neutral at all. They were helping the Allies. Yes, they were. They were giving weapons and arms and aid and money to the Allies that were fighting in that war at the time, like the United Kingdom. They were not totally neutral. You are correct. They were even sending supply ships across the Atlantic Ocean to the British Isles. The U.S. likes to do that. The U.S. likes to give, if they're not militarily involved directly with their own soldiers, they tend to give other factions money and arms and other supplies. The mistake that the United States made in the 1980s with Afghanistan is they just assumed that anyone who was against the Soviet Union should be immediately considered a friend. That they should be immediately considered a friend, and we should just give them weapons, arms, money and other aid to them. But the United States should have probably thought more clearly about that, or they should probably taken that. They should probably should have thought that out more, because when it comes to Afghanistan in the 1980s, the it's just that may not have been the case with the Soviet Union in the 1980s in Afghanistan. Like, the United States, in my opinion, of course, speaking with hindsight here, that was like 40 years ago. But hey, maybe just because they're fighting against the Soviet Union, maybe that doesn't necessarily make them our allies too. Maybe that doesn't necessarily make them our friends too. Maybe we should go investigate why they're fighting against the Soviet Union. Maybe we should have investigated why they're doing that and what their motivations are, and if these people that are fighting against the Soviet Union, Afghanistan, the Mujahideen, are they worth giving money and supplies to, and why are they? Like, just because they're fighting against the Soviet Union, that shouldn't automatically we should not have just assumed that therefore they're okay to give supplies to and to give money and arms to. Like, and I'm not saying the United States government had to openly support the Soviet Union where they had to be like, in this case we backed the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. I'm not saying they had to do that either, but like, maybe, just maybe, you should look into who some of these people are that you're giving money and weapons to. Last time I checked, the United States did the same thing in Central America and South America, giving money and weapons and supplies to dictatorships, because those dictatorships claim to be anti-communist. So therefore, they just gave them help. Well, I mean, how does it make the United States look? Maybe we shouldn't be just giving people supplies because they say they don't like communism. Well, it's like, who are these people that we're giving these supplies to? Maybe we should look into that. Maybe what I'm trying to say is, the United States should not just be giving money and supplies to anyone who just wanted to fight the Soviet Union. Because just because they're fighting the Soviet Union, that doesn't mean that they should automatically be like our friends either. Like, the enemy of my enemy is the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, should not always be the case. Which is totally fine to a point, but they have helped establish several dictatorships over various countries during the Red Scare over communism, because those leaders or regimes seemed more lenient to following American influence. Yep, totally, Ryan. I mean, I didn't read your comment during my little spiel there, but yeah, that's what the government did. The United States government did, because in their mind, it's like the lesser of two evils. Oh, well, we don't like the communists, we don't like the Soviet Union, but here's a dictatorship in Central America or South America or somewhere else that also doesn't like the Soviet Union, or they don't like communism, and we think that, therefore they're the lesser of two evils or something like that. Well, it's like, okay, but there's still, maybe we shouldn't be necessarily giving these people help either. Like, or if there is help given to them, maybe we should pressure them, because the United States of America is a nice big superpower with multiple democratic leaning allies, like Canada, for instance. Maybe we should pressure some of these people into giving up that authoritarian power and making them become more democratic. Maybe we could have done that too, instead of just giving them weapons and supplies. And it's like, oh, you can keep your dictatorship as long as you just don't let the commies in. It's like why are we going to sacrifice that? Why? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, yeah, the commies in the Soviet Union, they weren't great either. They're authoritarian. They're totalitarian too. I'm not supporting the Soviets like that. I'm not. At the same time, there's a certain way we could have done things differently, and like just willingly giving dictatorships supplies and arms and money because they didn't like the Soviet Union, didn't like the communists. It's like, it's the same with the Taliban. It's like, the only difference between those dictatorships and the Taliban is the Taliban came to bite us in the ass later with Al Qaeda. those dictatorships in Central America and South America really didn't do a direct violent. They haven't had a direct violent impact, in my opinion, on the United States like the Taliban and Al Qaeda did. Yeah, there is some there's some turbulence in Central America and South America in certain countries, which may have and us and the wars, the proxy wars in those countries may have contributed to that instability, and may have caused potentially migration to happen. At the same time, though, it's not as dramatic as planes being flown into towers. It doesn't. It's not as stark of a. It's not as direct in your face as planes being flown into towers. But yeah, no, I mean the United States definitely, and NATO for that matter. We just give weapons and supplies and money to just anyone because they're like, oh, we don't like the commies. It's like, okay, well, just because they don't like the commies, that doesn't necessarily mean we should be giving them money and weapons. Like, who are these people that that they're not? They shouldn't necessarily be our. They're not necessarily. They shouldn't necessarily be our allies either. Like, maybe they're not good people either. It shouldn't be so black and white where it's like, oh, you don't like the commies? Well, then you're with us. It's like, why? Why are they with us? Like, who are these people? Like, what do they stand for? What do they believe in? Like, it's like last time I checked, the Soviet Union, the Soviet bad government in Afghanistan, they were giving girls education. They were letting girls go to school in 1980s Afghanistan and late 1970s late 1970s Soviet Union. We let girls go to school here in the United States, and I'm glad we do. Maybe we should look into that because the Mujahideen, portions of them didn't want girls to go to school. Like the part of the faction of the Mujahideen that would evolve to later become the Taliban. So why are we giving like? Funny enough, we in that instance, there may have been a chance that we may have had more in common with the Soviet Union in that particular context than we did with the Mujahideen, despite the fact that the Soviet government and the Soviet backed allied government in Afghanistan was also very totalitarian and very brutal. They even carried out reprisals, and they killed the Soviet backed government in Afghanistan also killed a lot of civilians too, unfortunately. Which is messed up. I agree, it's messed up. From my limited knowledge on Soviet-backed Afghanistan history, but like the Soviet Union committed some bad stuff there in Afghanistan too. So I'm not trying to say like the Soviet Union was some guardian angel, because they weren't either. At the same time, no, it's just I feel like I'm repeating myself at this point, but like, yeah, we should have just we should have examined more closely. Or the U.S. government, I should say, and our allies should have examined more closely who are we giving supplies to fight the Soviet Union, and are they worth giving, weapons to? Are they worth giving money to? Are these really people we should be doing business with? And clearly, and yeah, I know I have the hindsight of 40 years, but like the point I'm trying to make is like maybe we should take some lessons from that. Like, hey, maybe just because there's this person, there's this group, there's this faction here that's backing they're not backing, but they're fighting against someone we don't like. Maybe we shouldn't necessarily just give them money either, or we shouldn't necessarily give them weapons either. Maybe they're not people we should be giving stuff to either. Maybe we should just stay out of it and let that other group fight that battle and stay out of it. Whatever. It's so ironic that the USA was birthed out of a rejection of a kingdom influencing their government just to essentially do the same thing only a few hundred years later. Yep. It is pretty ironic. They got the money and they got the power to do that, so they start doing that. You don't need a kingdom, and you don't need a king to do that. And the U.S. proved that very well, that we didn't need a king to do essentially that, to influence other governments or to take over other governments, or to influence them through soft power. with money and resources to become our allies. I mean, shoot, even with Saddam Hussein, I brought up Saddam Hussein earlier. We backed Saddam Hussein in the Iraq-Iranian war because of the Iranian revolution, is the Iranian Islamic Revolution going on, and Saddam was terrified by that. He hated that what was going on in Iran. He thought that was going to come over to his side and do that to him too, because again, you have the Shiites from Iran. You have a bunch of Shiites living in Iran, and there's also a sizable population of Shiites living in Iraq too. So maybe some of the Shiites would be inspired in Iraq to rise up, seeing what happened in Iran. But the point is that the U.S. gave Saddam Hussein and his government a bunch of money and weapons, and then later when Saddam, he pushed too many buttons and crossed the wrong line by invading Kuwait, then we had to go after him too. So it shows you how like flimsical and flimsy some of these allies are. Like all they gotta do is just cross one line, and all of a sudden they're the enemy again, or they are the enemy. I suppose in the case of Iraq, I could understand why the U.S. government would want to give Saddam more money, more weapons, because he had more of a. Saddam had, Iran. It's like you want to contain that. I could see why the U.S. government wanted to contain that. When it comes to the Soviet Union, though, I mean, like, in Afghanistan, I mean, it's like, I don't know, just let them deal that out. Why are we going to give guerrilla fighters, weapons and supplies and stuff like that? Just let the Soviet, again, going back to the lesser two evils thing. Gotta love politics, right? Crazy, crazy stuff. America's becoming their dad, essentially. Yep. It's kind of a big joke Canadians have. We tend to see ourselves, along with Australia and New Zealand, as the kids that waited and left the empire in good terms. Drastic, simplified version of events, but yeah. Yeah, that's a good point there, Ryan. Yeah, like the tender see ourselves as the kids that waited and left the empire on good terms, like the good kids and stuff like that. But yeah, so it reminds me of a meme that I saw actually with the it was like a family photo. It was like a mom and dad, and the dad was like Great Britain. I think the mom was like Canada or somewhere else, and then like all the kids were like New Zealand, Australia, maybe Canada was one of the kids too in this family portrait. It was a meme, and then the one kid that's America or the USA is like dressed in like punk rock gear or a punk rock outfit or a rock and roll outfit or a glam rock outfit, and all the other siblings and the mom and dad are dressed in like formal American attire, like dresses and suits and ties and stuff like that. It was pretty funny to see that, and just like have the more rebellious looking kid labeled as like America. Whereas the other ones were more formally dressed, like Australia, New Zealand, Canada. So yeah, I think it definitely plays into what you said right there. Osama invading those countries screams post World War I Hitler vibes. I'm not sure what you mean by Osama there. I don't recall Osama invading countries, but I do recall like I can't see a similarity between Hitler and Osama with the after the wars that they were involved in, like how Hitler was involved in World War I and Osama was involved in the fight against the Soviet Union, and how they could become more radicalized after each of those wars ends for like different reasons. I can see a similarity there, like you said, the post World War I vibes, Hitler vibes. I can see a similarity there with Osama, the post Soviet Afghanistan war vibes. I can see potentially more radicalization right there, more hostility. Yeah. Speaking of Osama bin Laden, he's been dead now for a while too. It's kind of crazy, That's a guy who was like, he was all in the news for all those years. He avoided capture for all those years, and like, constantly in the news. And like, now that he's dead, I mean, he's like barely talked about. He's been relegated to the history pages, but he left his mark. He left his mark for sure. But yeah, no, I mean, in terms of just news media and sensationalism, he's definitely just not there like he was. I mean, granted, he did get killed, but like, you just don't really see people talking about Osama bin Laden anymore, is what I'm trying to say. Not as much as they would have back when he was alive and on the run, or right after 9/11 happened. Crazy, crazy world we live in, folks. Crazy, crazy world we live in. But yeah, folks, I'm just going to try and wrap this up. So yeah, like I said earlier, it's been just like crazy. It's been, 20 years, 20 freaking years. It feels like yesterday. It doesn't feel like 20 years ago, to be honest. When you really want to look back at with 9/11, with September 11th, like 20 years ago does not feel like a long time ago. Not to me. I mean, 20 years ago is not a long time ago. But what I'm trying to say is like, in my mind, it doesn't feel like 20 years ago. It feels like a shorter time. I'm sure for many people it feels that way too. But yeah, it's been 20 years already. I feel better now that I've kind of gotten things out there. I'm kind of just discussing it and talking about it. Just like, I had a lot on my shoulders. I watched videos today about 9/11. It happened, folks. It happened, and like, it's very sad, and like, it's a lot to think about sometimes. It really is. It's just like, it's just a lot to think about all the time that's passed too. And the changes that have been made, and and the ramifications of it. Because most of my life, I've lived in the aftermath of that. And like, there's even people who weren't even born when it happened, or they were just little babies when it happened, that have no memory of it because they were just little kids. I mean, think about it. It's 2021. It was 20 years ago. There was people that weren't even born yet. It's just, they'll have to live in a post 9/11 world. I mean, shoot, even for me, I was a young kid, like, I barely remember what life was like before 9/11. I can barely remember it. I remember one time going to an airport and like before 9/11, and I vaguely remember it being pretty easy to get through security. So I do remember that. But yeah, even though I'm younger, and even though I was a young lad when 9/11 happened, it still left a mark on me too. Possibly even more so because I'm a history buff. So like the history buff mind went into gear for me personally when it happened. But yeah, it's just a crazy thing, It still gets me worried to this day, especially what happened in Afghanistan recently. It makes me wonder what's going to happen next. Because it feels like something can happen. I don't know when it can happen. It doesn't feel like a matter of if it can happen. It feels like a matter of when another kind of attack can happen, and when it does, what's it going to look like? What's it going to be like? Because I mean, there have been other terrorist attacks after 9/11 too. There was a shooting in like New York City a few years ago. There was the Boston Marathon bombing. There was other incidences that happened too. So, we just live in a post 9/11 world at this point. It's been a post 9/11 world for 20 years now. A different kind of world, a different kind of mindset, a different way of viewing the world and how the world operates and how the world works. Gone are the days where we could simply just have black and white. This is the enemy, this is the good guy. Now, in my opinion, things are not so black and white as they may have been. I feel they're definitely more gray, more nuance. Granted, I'm sure not everyone feels like that, but to me, it feels more nuanced when I think hard about it. Yeah. I actually just got a message from the leader of a party in my local riding, thanking me for my support. So I did leave the stream briefly. 20 years and three Spider-Man reboots ago. Yeah, right. Three Spider-Man reboots. They're coming out with another Matrix movie. I saw a meme about that too, where like someone was like, "Imagine if you went into a coma 20 years ago and you woke up, and one of the first things you hear about is like is the Matrix and stuff like that." Yeah. They're making a new Matrix movie, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. In my mind, my younger cousins are still like 10 or 12, but in reality, they are already near finishing high school and are driving. I only graduated in 2013 personally. Like you graduated high school in 2013? Yeah, that is a little surreal. And I feel you there, man. Like you do have family relatives where like you're used to them being a certain age, but then in reality they're like much older. Like, but you don't imagine them like that. You imagine them being a different age and stuff like that. And I totally understand that. So yeah, you graduated in 2013 though. Yeah, uh so yeah, I'm sure you have vivid memories of 9/11. In fact, you do. Yeah. You mentioned yours earlier. Um but yeah, so it's just like it's just been a lot that's happened. It's been a lot that's happened. But folks, it's been about 2 hours of me talking and going back and forth on different topics related to this whole thing. And thank you so much, Ryan, for being a part of it. Thank you, Ryan, for giving your own take on things. And I was more than happy to read out loud your own comments as well. For those people who may watch this in the future and are just listening to it or not like really watching this, because this can be thought of as more of a podcast as well, or more of an audio format. You don't necessarily have to watch me just staring at my webcam, just talking stuff like that as well. You can listen to this while playing video games or something. We do have to remember not all terrorist attacks are from foreign enemies, and not all are simply because of religion extremists. Yes, that's also very true. Ryan, you make a good point. Terrorist attacks come in different forms, including domestic forms, and for various reasons, including non-religious reasons as well. And unfortunately, there have been multiple terrorist attacks in different forms, like the ones you're implying, Ryan. That's true as well. There's ones that happen in. There's other types of terrorist attacks that happen in the United States. There's other kinds of terrorist attacks that happen worldwide. So that's another thing too. It's definitely, I think that's definitely an aftermath of 9/11. Like I'm not saying terrorist attacks didn't happen before 9/11, but like it's like like people didn't really. I don't think I don't. It's just this is a guess, but I don't think people accepted the idea of a terroristic attack as much as they do now. Like it feels like it wasn't as common before 9/11, or it wasn't as like solidified, or wasn't as much accepted by the general public in the United States that like, hey, this is a thing and this can totally happen. This can totally happen in the United States or elsewhere in the form of a terrorist attack. You know, it doesn't have to be an army of like tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of soldiers. It can also just be a small attack of a few people, like holding guns or bombs, or in this case, hijacking a plane and diving into a building. And it caused massive damage. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap up, man. Wrap up, people. Great stream, dude. If you want to keep chatting with me, I'm available on Facebook and Insta under the same name here. Cheers. Thank you, dude. I appreciate it. I appreciate your support, Ryan. And I appreciate the offer. I do very much appreciate everything that you've contributed tonight to this stream, because you definitely helped to keep the flow going, in my opinion. So I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in as well. Oh, you'll be listening to it again. Oh, thank you so much. That's awesome. Oh, and great, you're playing a video game. Yeah, so Like then, and that's totally with these longer formats. Like people can totally listen to this like while they're cooking or cleaning or playing video games. Yeah, dude, The Amazing Spider-Man 2012. I still get to actually see that movie, so that's my bucket list. I decided to procrastinate on that, and then I never ended up seeing it. But I've heard mixed reviews about it. But that's a time for that's a tale for another time, as they say. All right, folks, thank you so much for listening or watching, however you prefer to interact with my content. Thank you so much all again, and let's hope for a brighter future. I don't know what the future holds, but hopefully a brighter one. All right, folks, take care now. Bye bye.